I'm not sure, but I think we are live right now. Normally it takes some seconds or minutes for people to join Facebook events. So I will start talking and I hope to see that somebody is watching us. Can I ask for maybe some comments if there is anybody out there watching us? And if yes, from where? We will still wait a second for a sign from our technical people if everything is fine. Somebody is writing, hey. Yes, great. I think we are live. Good afternoon to some of you. Good morning to others. Good evening to still others. Thank you for joining us. It will be one of minority rights group events called Sofa Talks, when I have an honor and pleasure to invite some of the female activists involved in minority rights. Today, I have a pleasure to introduce Gwendolyn Albert to all of you. Hello, Gwen.
Hello.
Very nice to see you. Very nice to meet you. Zoom meet you. That's how I should say probably. You are in Prague, in Czech Republic, right?
Yes, I'm coming to you from Prague.
Great. Can everybody see us? I see comments. I see that some people love your amazing work. So we have some fans of yours here. Great. I would like to tell to all the public that I will be reading comments all the time. So if you have any questions, please write them down. I'm not sure if I will ask them immediately or maybe after we finish our talk, but it will be great to know what you are interested in. So, Gwen, I would like to introduce you to our watchers right now. You are a human rights activist. You are a very strong ally to Romani community in Czech Republic and Europe in general. You write and translate for the portal Romea.cz. And you are communicating with all these big organizations, with Council of Europe, with European Commission, with OSCE, with UN High Commissioner for Human Rights about Romani stories, right?
Yes, that is basically what I do. Very focused on what's happening in the Czech Republic, basically for the last 15 or 20 years. But also very interested in what's happening specifically with members of the Romani minority around Europe.
Yes, and I found information that last year you received an award for humanity from the Committee for the Redress of the Romani Holocaust. Can you tell me first about this? What was this award?
Oh, this was very special for me. The Committee for the Redress of the Roma Holocaust in the Czech Republic is an advocacy group that brings together people whose relatives died in a specific camp during World War II in what was then the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, called Lety, which is in South Bohemia. And there was an internment camp there, a concentration camp there. It was only open for about 18 months, but the death rate was very high, including many children who died. And then all of the inmates were transported to Auschwitz. So it was a key part of the Nazi machinery, specifically targeting Romani and Sinti people in Bohemia. And in 1995, this history was acknowledged by then President Havel. And I happened to be living in South Bohemia, and so I went to the ceremony where they unveiled a monument. And one of the more tragic aspects about what had developed in the interim there was that during communism, a pig farm had been built on the site. And it was not a small farm. It was an industrial farm with about 13,000 pigs. And this, as you can imagine, did not smell very good to those of us who were there on that day in May, seeing this memorial unfold and so, or be unveiled. And so I got more and more involved in the fact that this farm was adjacent to this memorial site and was making it in this invisible way, really desecrating it with the smell. And I became a supporter of the people who were petitioning for the farm to be moved. And after a very long time, they managed to succeed to convince the Czech government to buy out the farm. The pigs are no longer there. And now there's going to be a new memorial built there on the actual former site that will really tell the history in a much more extensive way of what happened there. And the advocacy group gave me the award last year, their For Humanity Award, not for the support that I had given them with that issue, but for other work that I had done, which was to support the women, many of them who are from the Romani community, who have been sterilized without their informed consent, both during communism and into the 21st century. And we've had another recent success with that. Last year, when they gave me the award, we didn't know if we were going to succeed. But this year we did succeed in passing a law that will compensate those who are able to document that they were sterilized without their informed consent. So that was a long effort. That was something I first became involved with that in the year 2004. So it's very special to me to have been honored by this Roma group for that issue, which is really the issue that I have dedicated a lot of time and energy to, together with many, many other people, I have to say.
Of
so
course.
That's a long, I can't give you a short answer. That's a long answer to your first question.
I like long answers, don't worry. And congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
It's always great when people are awarded for the long, many years work they are doing. I hope we will still have time at the end of our meeting, maybe still to come back to the topic of sterilization, because I feel that this is something that is not enough discussed in Europe. But we met today because of another story, because of the death of Stanislav Tomáš 2 months ago, on the 19th of June. Something happened. Can you tell me? You are our person on the ground. You know the situation the best. Could you please describe what happened 2 months ago?
Yes. So this happened in Teplice, Czech Republic. Police were called to deal with a brawl, a fight that was happening out in the street. There were two people who were fighting, and they were sort of running all over, chasing each other, banging into parked cars. It was a scary thing. So people called the police. When the police got to the scene, they didn't see two people anymore. They only saw one. And the person whom they saw was Mr. Tomáš. He was lying on the ground and he was already obviously injured. They proceeded to arrest him. They handcuffed him with his arms behind his back. There were two people, one police officer holding down his legs and the other doing the handcuffing. And then they kept him lying prone on his belly with his arms behind the handcuff behind his back for 5 minutes, with the other officer kneeling in his neck area all that time. We know this because there was a bystander who filmed what they did and then posted the footage online to social media. And it's very, very chilling. Romea.cz has carried it. It's online there. Especially if you know that he later died it's quite chilling to watch it because he sort of gradually stops moving, gradually stops making any noise, and then it's clear that he's unconscious at the very least. Yes, the footage cuts off, but after the footage, what we can see from the footage, the police called an ambulance, which apparently took about 9 minutes to get there. He was taken to the hospital and he was declared dead. The fact that a bystander was brave enough to film this and post it online really galvanized an enormous response from the Romani community in the Czech Republic. Not everybody, but for many people in the Czech Republic, and also internationally. People very much felt that this was because the footage showed that it was outside, it was in a Romani neighborhood. There were actually people on the street sort of interacting and commenting. In that way, it was very, very reminiscent of the George Floyd footage that the whole world has seen. It was a hot day. If you look at the footage, you'll see that there are men without their shirts on outside, and it just was a shocking, traumatizing, horrible thing to see. And so there was quite a big response from civil society, not just in the Czech Republic, but in Europe in general. I'm a member of a body that advises the Czech government. It's called the Council for Roma Minority Affairs. We have the council is half ministerial appointees and half people who are from civil society. We're all volunteers. And we immediately raised the alarm when it was Romea.cz that published the video footage and a description of where it had come from and what the police were saying about what they had done. And so we immediately raised the alarm and said, this has to be investigated. This can't be normal police procedure for somebody to really stay in place on someone's neck with their knee for that long. Yes.
You mentioned that recording this moment, it was an act of courage for somebody. Why did you say that?
Well, the person posted it and Romea grabbed it and downloaded it and kept it on their website. And when they went back later to see, the person had removed it, or maybe Facebook removed it. It's hard to know always with Facebook who originates the removal. But I think that when there's something that shows the police in a bad light, many members of communities who don't trust the police in the first place, and probably for good reason, are nervous about raising the possibility that the police could have done something wrong. Those of us who don't experience mistreatment by the police don't have that fear or wouldn't have that fear. But I think it's quite brave. And this happened in a Romani neighborhood. I don't know if the person who filmed it was Roma or not, but I think it was brave of them to post it. And they're also in general, it's brave to do anything on social media in the Czech Republic, because the level of discourse there is horrible. It's horrible. It's full of racism. It's full of callousness. It's full of, I mean, just any vein of hatred you want, that will show up immediately in response to things that people post and share that are serious and where they're sharing it because what they want is for people to have a serious discussion, and instead they get the kinds of responses that they get.
Can you tell us a bit more about this place, about this neighborhood, and also about Stanislav Tomáš himself? I feel it would be nice to mention more.
I don't really know all that much about Mr. Tomáš, to be honest with you. There has not been a lot discussed about him, and this is one of sort of the sadder aspects. He was survived by his mother, who is not well, and also by his sister in terms of his immediate family. And there hasn't been a lot of discussion of who he was in the media, or even to those of us who, for example, were involved with the funeral. We know what the police have said about him, and what the police have said about him has been, quite unfortunately, in the immediate aftermath of this incident, something that pretty much amounted to like character assassination in the media. They mentioned that he was a recidivist. They mentioned that he was apparently, on the basis of the preliminary autopsy report, that he had methamphetamine in his system at the time of this incident. And the tabloid press immediately ran with this, and their headlines were, you know, drug addict dies. And so this, I would say that that's the thing that sadly, more than anything else, if you say this person's name, people who read the Czech media only will immediately think, oh, the drug addict. And that's just a sad fact, that's the main thing that has been publicized about him, unfortunately.
What really scared me when I saw the news and when I was reading what is happening was the fact that the police officers were uploaded by the politicians. Yes, they were, in the first hours, politicians made positive comments about the behavior of police.
I don't know if it's the first hours, definitely within the next few days.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely within the next few days after the media publicized this, like 3 or 4 days later. Yes, the Interior Minister commented, he expressed approval of this action, and he alluded to the drug use, and it was just extremely callous. It was a kind of callousness that I hadn't seen, frankly, from a top official in a very long time here. Very, very disappointing. He was quickly followed by the Prime Minister, who also thanked the officers, which, you know, the implications of that when somebody died in the aftermath of their intervention is frankly chilling. The Prime Minister said that normal people don't end up in such circumstances.
That was the quote, yes?
Yes, which is again terrible. The all of the implication is from what both those ministers and also the police president said, although the police president at least expressed regret for the fact that Mr. Tomáš had died, but he also said that the officers had done the right thing. And, you know, we all can look at the video, and many people at a visceral level strongly disagree with that assessment. And if it's really the case that that's what the police are authorized to do, then there has to be a big discussion here about changing that, because it's not acceptable. Anybody could end up under the knee of an officer. You may think that you're normal, but you could end up there. You could end up because of mental illness or physical something happening to you. You could be in some circumstance where your description fits the description of a wanted person, and they come to arrest you even though you're already on the ground, and it could be your life that's at risk also. And I think that's what human rights activists are hoping to communicate to the police about why we're so upset about this case.
And have there been any other public figures expressing condolences?
No. And that's the other thing that's really quite sad. It's a cheapening of the value of human life. Yes, you can feel it in from all of the media, all of the comments. For many people hear the news that he had drugs in his system at the time and say, "Oh, well, then what do you expect?" And that's not good enough. That's not a humane response. And we do expect more in Europe of the police.
But you mentioned that there was some international answer to what was happening. I took part here in Berlin in one of the events, and I know that in many cities in Europe, things were happening. Did it surprise you?
You know, it didn't surprise me so much because I know the international Romani movement, and I know how strong it can be when something motivates people. And certainly the existence of this video is a big motivator. People can look for themselves and decide what it is, whether this is worth responding to or not. I was very glad about all of the international demonstrations that happened. And I want you to know that also the Czech Foreign Ministry took note of them. When I was at a meeting of the larger Roma Council, they reported on them in a very, very fair way. They said they were all peaceful. Many events all over Europe, going to Czech embassies and in Mr. Tomáš's name and saying that his death wasn't right. Also, a very important organization there in Germany, the Central Council for German, Sinti, and Roma, issued a scathing statement, sent a letter, visited the Czech ambassador, really emphasized that they watched the video and they find it inexcusable. And that was a big help, I think. There were local gatherings also in the Czech Republic, one in Prague and more than one in Teplice, one of which became a demonstration. But the demonstrations were really all over. They were in Austria, in Belgium, there in Germany, in Ireland, in Kosovo, in Romania, in Spain, in the UK. Really quite a lot of people were outraged by what they saw in that video.
And all this happened thanks to the fact that the situation was recorded, right? The fact that there was a video footage gave all of us, international community, completely different feeling and access to this situation.
Yes, you will never see a police report describing what actually happens in the same way that a video footage can capture it. And unfortunately, the police have body cameras here in the Czech Republic that they're supposed to be able to use, and they didn't use them during this intervention. And we just don't have the evidence that would have come from their cameras now, which is a real shame. And it makes one wonder whether or not there shouldn't be some changes to the rules as to when police turn those cameras on.
I need to ask you this question. In all media around Europe, there was this comparison to George Floyd situation. Can you tell me what was similar, but what was different? How do you feel about this comparison?
I think that in general, it's an apt comparison. I know there are many people who disagree with it, and that's okay. We don't have to compare everything that happens here to what happens in the United States. But first of all, the fact that people, this was not happening in a dark, out of the way place. This was happening in public. The police knew that they were being watched by many people. They knew that people were filming them. They knew that they were on display. They knew it, and they continued to proceed the way they proceeded in this neighborhood of a marginalized community. That's the first thing that is a big parallel, in my opinion. Second is obviously the use of the kneeling technique, which, especially in the aftermath of George Floyd, is is even more shocking. Where it differs is that Mr. Floyd went from standing on his feet, talking to people normally, to being forced onto the ground by the police. And in the Tomáš case, it's different. There was other footage taken by bystanders that was also released by the police prior to their arriving on the scene, showing him in this altercation with the other person. And it shows him already having collapsed to the ground at other times, sort of careening around, banging his head on a car at one point. So there was a lot that happened to him before he ended up on the ground and the police arrived. So it's a more complicated case in terms of the causal factors that may have led to his death, for sure. Much more complicated than George. And then, of course, the George Floyd case was so awful, so long, 9 minutes, so just unremittingly awful. The other difference is that we learned in America after great efforts by civil society there, the names of the officers involved, criminal proceedings was opened against them, et cetera, and Officer Chauvin was found guilty of murder. We don't know the names of the officers who did this. I'm sure people locally probably know who they were, but nobody else knows their names. We don't know anything about them. We don't know what else might have motivated them to behave the way they behaved in this interaction. Now, those of us who are on the council submitted some questions to the police through the Human Rights Commissioner. And one of the questions that we asked was, did the officers know or recognize Mr. Tomáš when they showed up? Because the police made such a big deal of painting him as a recidivist. And according to the answers that we've received from the police, the officers did not know him. They say that he was a stranger to them. There are many other questions that one would need to ask, including questions about possible racial motivation, et cetera. And what we're all waiting to learn right now is, what is the venue going to be where these questions are asked? Is there going to be a criminal trial? Will there never be a criminal trial? Will all of this have to be posed purely through a civil procedure? That's what we're waiting to hear. And we're not going to know the answer until October. According to what the police have communicated to us through the Human Rights Commissioner, they are waiting to receive the final autopsy report, and apparently the attorney for the family has added many other questions to be asked, and that they need expert testimony before this can be closed. So we won't know until next month the answer to any of those questions. What I do know is right now is that their theory of the death, the police theory of the death, is that he died as a result of whatever drugs he took. And they have opened a proceeding into whoever made and gave him the drugs. I don't know how far that's going to get or what, how. We just don't know. We just don't have the answer yet to what the autopsy can reveal about what caused his death.
So, which steps were taken in those last 2 months, and which steps were not taken that you and different activists in the council would expect police to do?
Well, I think it's more a case of. I believe that many of us would have hoped that a criminal inquiry would be brought solely on the basis of the video. Mm-hmm. They have not yet chosen to do that. They may, but they haven't yet chosen to do that. And they've been very rushed and very defensive in their communication about this with the public, as we were discussing. And that's the other unfortunate thing. The police, are within their prerogative to say the investigation's open, we're not going to discuss it, and to keep things at a neutral level, but they didn't do that. They obviously felt somewhat pressured because of the public reaction, and because, you know, the Romani community, many members of the Romani community really took this, took it personally, in the sense of sort of this symbolic attack on the community. Not everybody, as I say, it's not a monolith, but definitely many people feel that this was wrong. This would have been wrong irrespective of what community Mr. Tomáš came from. So the requests for a criminal proceedings to be open have been filed by other parties, not the police themselves and not the prosecutor. So the attorney for the family has filed one. There's a group here called the Union of Vlach Roma, who also filed one, and they filed it against an unidentified perpetrator, because, as I said, we don't know the names of the officers who were involved. We also know, and we don't really understand why, that the family requested a second autopsy. There was a preliminary autopsy. They gave the preliminary results that fit with their theory of the death, and the family then requested a second autopsy, and that request was rejected. And we don't really know why they rejected it. What the harm would have been of a second autopsy, I don't know. But they did reject it, and that's unfortunate. And that may come back to haunt them later, you know, years from now before the European Court of Human Rights. We just don't know. And the other thing that they really, as far as I know, have not done, and I think it's quite regrettable that they haven't done it. It was mentioned by the chair of the Roma Council as something that should be done, and later it was also mentioned by a Romani human rights activist, Edita Stejskalova, who held a press conference. The officers who were involved should not be on duty anymore, in our opinion, pending the outcome of these investigations. But because the police theory of the death is that it's completely to do with the drugs, they disagree with that. So as far as we know, those officers are still on duty. And that's something that we think, in cases where a death is the outcome, it should be automatic that they shouldn't be returned to duty until everything is cleared up. So that's that's where we are. Ms. Stejskalova held a press conference. She did some sort of research from publicly available sources. She held a press conference here in Prague about a month ago. I was there, and I read the statement from Amnesty International, the Czech branch at that time. And she compiled some very interesting information about deaths in police custody or in, you know, following a police intervention and arrest. And she noted that during the last 30 years, there have been 10 cases of deaths that, you know, immediately followed an intervention. 8 of them were people who were not Czech.
Okay.
5 of them were Roma.
Mm-hmm.
And more than one involved people with a psychiatric diagnosis. And the initial theory of drug involved behavior was featured prominently in a lot of them, and not all of those not all of those cases was the police action approved of. Some of those families very successfully sued for, I guess, the equivalent of wrongful death here. So so there's a problem, I would say, and it's definitely the police. We all want the police to intervene against people in such a way that they survive the intervention, because the human rights community has high expectations of the police here, and that's how it should be.
Can you tell me a bit more about structural discrimination or violence towards Romani community in Czech Republic?
Yes. We only have 10 minutes, I don't know.
Let's go.
Yeah. Where do we begin? So the pressure to assimilate into Czech society, to have a Czech name, to get rid of any kind of non-Czech accent, to behave in a way that is similar to everyone else, is enormous. It's an enormous pressure that has existed over generations, irrespective of what political arrangements were in place here. That's the first thing that's important to understand. Romani people in this part of the world have been stigmatized. It's a stigmatized identity. Some writers, Ian Hancock in the United States, has written about it as a pariah identity. And there's a lot of people who have written about a phenomenon called anti-gypsyism. Some people don't like that term. They prefer the term anti-Roma racism. But it's to do with the idea of the gypsy in society as this idea of the wild, uncivilized person who can't be trusted. This is an idea that all European cultures share. There is a word for gypsy in all European languages, and it's very important for people in Europe to come to terms with the fact that this is a set of beliefs that has really really impacted the way Romani communities and Sinti communities and also traveler communities in Northern Europe and in the UK have been approached and dealt with by people in power. To make a very long story short, people from this community in this part of the world have been subjected even more than everybody else, especially during communism or during totalitarianism, during the Nazi protectorate, who were already being subjected to situations in which their rights were being curtailed. Romani people here have been subjected even more restrictions. And the many, many measures are designed to this day to sort of try to keep them separate, apart, in one place, able to be followed. And the examples of this stem from the early days of when Czechoslovakia first began to be an independent state and a democracy. Some of the first really anti-gypsyist laws were passed in the late 20s when Romani people were required to settle, and they were no longer allowed to travel, living on the road, living in an itinerant way, spending the spring and summer doing different economic activities that involve either seasonal agricultural work or door-to-door sales. In the early first part of the 20th century, that was a big way that Romani people made a living. That ground to a halt, and then the process of making sure that they would be that there would be an actual register that existed, an inventory, a registry of Romani people began in the 30s. And sadly, those efforts that began during the democratic era, the records that were created, were used by the Nazis to round people up, to put them in the concentration camps, and to send them to their deaths. So that was the first, and we're just talking the 20th century. There's all kinds of stuff before then. Mm-hmm. When we come to this part of, the late 20th century and today, the mechanisms by which this is done are much more indirect. They're much more subtle. They're quite insidious. They're unacknowledged. People don't want to be seen to be bigots and racists. No one wants to, few of us, it's getting more fashionable today, but few people actually want to be seen to be discriminating bigots. They would rather that it happen without them acknowledging or having to face that that's actually what's going on. So what happened during communism, definitely, and all of the processes that began during communism have an echo into our present day. One of the biggest measures definitely was the way children were assigned to education. Romani children were disproportionately assigned to schools that were called special schools. They were considered to be schools for the mentally inferior. And this was irrespective of whether the child had a cognitive disability or an intellectual disability or not. They were simply sent there on the understanding that basically everyone wanted it that way. The non-Roma parents didn't want Roma children in their classes. Some of the Roma parents wanted to make sure that the school they went to would not be full of children who would stigmatize or bully or harshly treat their children. And so there's been a perpetuated system of segregation that was only really dealt with starting in the late 1990s, when the European Roma Rights Center sued the Czech government and got a judgment against the Czech Republic for having allowed the indirect discrimination of Romani children in special education. And on the back of that, there's been a lot of advocacy that's happened here to try to bring Romani children into the mainstream, and it's an uphill battle, is what I'll say. And the other thing I would just really like to stress to everybody, you know, we have this term minority, and I'm not so sure how useful it is, but in numerical terms, the Roma are in the Czech Republic really a minority. They are an estimated 2.5% of the population. So we're not even talking about a group that has, in a democratic sense, an opportunity to leverage, I don't know, 10% of the vote or something. Mm-hmm. They really, their numbers are low, and that's a problem for them in terms of their clout in the society. And that's, I guess I'll stop talking.
You shouldn't stop talking.
Well, I'm just going on and on. So.
I just would like to remind everybody that we will finish soon, and if there are any questions from your side, I will be more than happy to forward them to Gwen. Let's still focus on how it is now, because I believe that the segregation in schools in 90s, all of this has consequence for what is happening today. It's a very long process. When it comes to health system, when it comes to access to services, I know that the social justice is a very, very difficult topic for Romani community, not only in Czech Republic, everywhere. But if you could just very shortly give us some examples of fields where there is still a lot of work to be done.
Education, in my opinion, is definitely such a field still. And the pandemic really showed us this. The pandemic showed us quite clearly how large the digital divide is in this country between anybody who's marginalized, but most of the people who are marginalized here are the Roma community. I think also there's an additional problem that arises when people are in a group that is racialized and marginalized and stigmatized. And that is that in a situation where social solidarity is not the norm, and where it's a market economy, and it's important to succeed and sort of fight your way onto the labor market. Romani people who are middle class, if they can pass for not Roma, have every incentive to suppress their identity. to keep it a secret, to not reveal it. This is, of course, their prerogative, but it makes it very hard to build bridges across the class divide that does exist in the Romani community in the Czech Republic. You have people here who are absolutely successful professionals, but they don't want to be associated with the drug addict who just died in the street, sadly. And so this means that, you know, this kind of development of compassion within the community and being able to reject all of the negative messages that come to you from the outside society about what it means to be Romani. I think this is the big internal struggle that many Romani people have. They are placed in this position by the larger society. I'm a foreigner here. I've lived here for 25 years in the Czech Republic. And I know what it is like to have people instantly realize that you are not Czech, that you're not from here, that there's something strange about you. And I'm a white person, so the times that this has been a problem for me in my life, in the 30 years I've been here, you know, I can count them on the fingers of one hand. But what Roma people have to deal with every single day, starting from their earliest socialization, coming into the schools and being immediately, in many cases, sadly, immediately stigmatized by their peers, sometimes by their teachers, and having to fight with that inside themselves, and then go on into the world and make a life somehow. It's terrible. It's a terrible psychological burden that many people in the Czech Republic do not understand in the slightest. They don't understand what the world is that they've made for Romani people here. And, you know, the media doesn't help. All of the stigma and all of the prejudice, all of the urban legends, all of the hoaxes, all of the myths. I mean, the Romea organization that I work for, they do endless work refuting the repetition of ridiculous claims that are made in the media here about Roma as alleged welfare cheats, all of it. It's really stunning. Like, if there are literally too few Romani people here to have committed everything that they've been accused of by this society as having committed, but it's still a huge blind spot, and it's a blind spot in large part because the number of Romani people who are willing to come out and say, look, I'm Roma, I'm here, this is my country too, and I have rights, and you're going to treat me equally. Well, this is really hard. It's really hard to do. It's really hard to do. And many people emigrate from here for that reason. There's been a sort of constant outflow of Romani people to societies where their stigma will not follow them. So Canada, the UK, Ireland, Australia, people go somewhere where they go to escape what this society prepares for them. And I just have enormous respect for everybody Romani who sticks it out in Europe, frankly. But I also know that, as you were saying, you know, there were all of these demonstrations. In many ways, the Romani community is doing more self-advocacy now than ever before. There are a number of very strong organizations and strong individuals, and there's, you know, Romani studies as an academic field still exists and is continuing, including here in the Czech Republic. so we shouldn't despair, but definitely everybody in Europe needs to learn more about these people and what they face.
The very last question to you. I know what we as Minority Rights Group, we are doing in the topic of Romani rights. We are building different programs with our partners in different countries. We try to organize a counter hate speech campaigns. But the question to you is, what an average European can do to help this situation?
I mean, I think it's really important to learn more about your own history. One of the biases of the last few decades has been this idea that Romani people, or the issue of Romani people, is solely related to Central and Eastern Europe. There's been a big sort of slant in that direction. And Romani people exist all over Europe, including in Northern Europe and Western Europe, and they face discrimination and stigmatization there also. And so I think it's very important to for people to learn more about where they live, the history of Romani people where they live, and to reflect a little more about their own, as Europeans, about their own use of things like the term gypsy. These are things that become embedded in language and in language use in an unconscious way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you thought about it in your native languages, you could come up with at least one or two unflattering or stereotyping, romanticizing jokes or turns of phrase or pieces of vocabulary that are about the idea of gypsies as stigmatized people. And just to start thinking about this a little, because it's important. It's important that we take a new approach, I think. And last but not least, see if you can actually meet somebody who is Romani and speak with them, because it's possible. It's possible, and it's important. And that's what I would say.
Great. We have 3 parts of homework about learning history, about reflecting your own language and your own vision of all the situation, and meeting Romani people. That is really, especially in Eastern Central Europe, not a very difficult thing to do. And if anybody has problem with it, please contact us. We will help it. We will help you do that. Gwendolyn, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and for all your knowledge. Let's stay in contact, and let's go on working on Romani rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.